Hi, welcome back. Today I'm going to be building a winter war diorama featuring the damaged SMK from my last video and these Finnish troops from ICM. So here's the SMK from the previous video, and this is a big kit, so it's going to need a big base. I like to use picture frames, photo frames for my bases, and as you can see here, this will just fit on an A4 photo frame. And even then the damage track is actually hanging off the edge, and the front left is hanging off the edge as well. But I don't really want to build a custom base just to be an inch or so bigger than an A4 frame, so this is what I'm going to go with. So I'm going to model this diorama somewhat on the historic photo of the SMK. So I'm going to have a little tree, or maybe a couple of trees here in the background. Obviously it's going to be a winter scene, but I'm using a bit of artistic license as well, so I'm going to have the Finnish skiers here to the front right of the tank. It's actually going to be quite hard to fit this tank on the frame. I could rotate it actually to make it a bit more perpendicular to the frame, but a good diorama tip is that you shouldn't really ever have any elements which are perpendicular or parallel to the edges. So if I make it parallel to that long edge, it just doesn't look right. Angles always work best. So I'm going to have to just keep it at this angle and accept the fact that actually that damage track either needs to be made shorter or needs to just overhang the edge. Probably what I will do is actually just break it off and actually put it embedded in the snow. So I'm just going to mark out roughly where things are going. I'm going to mark out around the tank. I'm going to use sculptor mold for the basic terrain, and then for the snow I'm going to use a product called Chrysel from Precision Snow and Ice, which is a really good product. So I've just scored the bottom of the photo frame, so I wasn't quite sure how well the sculptor mold would hold otherwise on such a smooth surface. And I'm just going to spread this out now all over the frame. At the moment I'm just looking for a fairly smooth base coat, and I'm going to build the snow up in a few more layers of sculptor mold later. Basically the situation I want is that the wind is blowing from the bottom of the frame here, so what will be the right hand side of the tank, so the snow will be drifting in that direction. The tree at the top left of the picture therefore won't have a huge amount of snow drifting against it, but it will be completely snow covered terrain there. And of course underneath the tank there'll be no snow as well, there'll be no additional snow, so there'll be a layer of snow and it will build around the outside of the tank. So this is the first layer, just making sure I go right into the corners. Now this base is flexing a little bit here. I probably should have glued that down to the frame before I started. So I'm just smoothing this out now with a circular motion, just trying to get 100% coverage on the base. Okay, so that's pretty good coverage now. All of this sculptor mold on the frame will just wipe off with a wet cloth, there's no problem there. And again, just using a circular motion just to flatten things out. None of the sculptor mold itself will represent snow, but I still want it to be reasonably smooth. So again, if you just wet your hands, wet your fingers, and then smooth it out, you get nice results. You can sand sculptor mold, but this just saves excessive sanding later. What you really don't want is any bits of the sort of the plaster or the fibres sticking up. They look a little bit unrealistic. Okay, so now it's nice and smooth. I'm going to take the SMK and I'm going to try and sink it a little bit into the snow. This is where you want to get it lined up the first time if you can do. There, that should be okay. Now this sculptor mold actually I mix quite thick, so this tank's not going to sink even with a little bit of pressure, it's not going to sink all the way in. So you can just about see the tank track marks there. Obviously that's not deep enough. A tank would sink a lot more deeply into snow, and of course because the tank's been abandoned for some time, the snow's going to build up around it as well. So what I need to do is just scoop out a little bit of the snow here to get the tank sinking a little bit lower into it. So I'm literally just going to use my finger just to pull that out. This is fine. I've got lots of working time with the sculptor mould. And then now if I bring the SMK back, it should go in a little bit further and just looks a bit more realistic. There, that's better. That bottom track now is just slightly below the top of the snow, which is exactly what I want. Just pushing it down. Okay, so here are the ugly parts of the sculptor mould, which I created when I dug out the track, so I just need to smooth these out now, and also add a little bit more just to bring the snow over the top of the bottom parts of the track. Not everywhere, I don't want to completely hide it, but I do want to give an impression that this tank is now a part of the landscape. It's been here for a while, and it's slowly been buried. And of course I want to cover up any gaps underneath that track as well, because there's no way that the track will be floating in the air. There we go. And just smoothing that out again, trying to make it look like the snow's drifted there. And then just the same thing for the broken track at the back. Okay, so that sculptor mould has been drying now for about 12 hours. So I'm coming back and I'm going to add a few more larger snowdrifts. So I've mixed up a little bit more sculptor mould. I want to strike a balance here between burying the tank and making it clear that it's been here for a while. And I want to just push this snow right in. I don't want it to be built up in like an artificial wall and not go behind the wheels. So I'm just using a spare piece of wood just to push it in there. It looks ugly right now, but it will be smoothed down. There we go, just with a wet finger I can just smooth that out and try and get a nice blending. Sculptor mould will attach very nicely to itself. You never have problems like you do with other materials where a new layer might separate from an old layer. It's going to bond very well on top. And then I want a similar but slightly smaller thing at the back. Same technique. Trying to get a sort of snowdrift shape where basically the snow's built up against the wheel and then it's falling away at the sides. And then just because I've got a little bit of sculptor mould left over and because the rest of the train is quite flat, I'm going to just put a little mound of snow here just to break things up a little bit. Make it a little bit less even. Perhaps that's built up because there's just a natural bump in the earth there, or I don't know, perhaps it's a tree stump somewhere under there. That's why it's built up. And then I'm just making some final touches now, just as it's starting to dry. Again, just trying to smooth out various pieces. So these are the figures from ICM, 3 winter troops, 2 of them on skis, and 1 reindeer. This is one of ICM's newer kits, and it's really nicely moulded, very clean, no flash. You get 1 sprue with the figures. So you can see here on the close-up, the uniform looks really nice, the folds in the material look great. Good level of detail here. And on the jackets as well, similar kind of thing. with the straps. The uniform, it looks like there's a little bit of weight to the material, like it's sort of hanging down, which is really nice. And the heads have a good amount of detail as well. I think the reindeer might have a few issues going together. He's hollow and he comes in 4 different parts, so you can see in the close-up here, the reindeer, the fur's got a nice texture to it. I'm not sure how easy that will be to paint and make it look realistic, but they've made a good attempt at least at moulding it. Then the head's separate and the antlers separate as well. And then the second sprue has the skis, the ski poles and the weapon. And ICM includes this colour sheet, which gives you construction and painting instructions all in one. This is the almost finished reindeer, it's just missing his antlers and the bags. There's going to be a little bit of seam filling needed there, but not too much. And here's one of the soldiers. Gone together very nicely. Again, very minimal filler I'll need here, if any. So the idea for my diorama is that this is the Russian SMK prototype, and it has hit a mine and disabled the track, which actually happened, and the Russians have abandoned it to recover it later, which also actually happened. In reality, actually, the Russians repaired the tracks, but they couldn't restart the tank, but I've overlooked that minor fact. And the idea is that these Finnish troops have come along and they've discovered this damaged Soviet tank abandoned in the forest. So this is the approximate layout I'm going to have for the soldiers. Basically the skier who's pointing his ski pole is going to be pointing at the damage to the track, and the other two have basically just arrived with him on the scene and are just inspecting the situation. I'm going to have 1, maybe 2 trees in the back left corner there behind the tank. If we look at the archive footage, you can see that the SMK was abandoned in a forested kind of area. I think actually 2 trees looks better. So these are the trees that I'm going to use. They're from Model Scene, and you can see they're a good size. I'm going to use 2 of them in the diorama, but I don't really want them to be identical sizes, so I'm going to chop probably about 1 inch, 2.5 centimeters off one of them. Model Scene do have these in different sizes, but I just bought a pack of 3 where they were all the same size. So you can see the scale of the tree, comparing that to the 1/35 scale figure there. The material I'm going to use for all of the snow and ice effects comes from Precision Snow and Ice, and they have a starter set which includes a few different items. So they have this winter camouflage paint, which is supposed to represent the whitewash which a crew would paint over their vehicles during winter times. They also have this snow and ice wash, and basically you sort of paint that on like you would a regular wash on a model, and the snow sort of settles in the corners and the crevices, and it looks like sort of an icy, snowy kind of build-up on the vehicle. So that's going to go on the vehicle itself. And then finally, the starter set includes 2 bags. It includes this Chrysel Snow Powder Fine, which you can see there is recommended for 1:160 to 1:135 scale models. And it also includes another pack of Chrysel Extra, which is for 1/35 scale and bigger models. I'm actually going to use the Extra on this model because I've basically run out of the Fine. I've used it on a few other things. But I think if I was going to do this again, I would probably use the Fine. I think it's slightly more suitable for 1/35 scale. And you also get this nice little metal sieve for applying the snow effects to your diorama. And although I didn't use it this time, you also get this adhesive, which is used for sticking the snow powder to the diorama. I'm using hairspray in this diorama, which I find also works well. And that adhesive you can brush apply, or you can airbrush it as well. And finally, the starter pack comes with this colour pamphlet which just shows you how to use each of the products. So that's Precision Snow and Ice. I'm not affiliated with them in any way, but I definitely recommend that you check them out if you are after some product for making a winter diorama. So the first job is to take the snow and ice wash and apply it to the crevices and the recesses of the vehicle. Basically just like you would do with a regular pin wash or panel liner. So I'm just dropping it here, for example, into the crevices and the tracks. It can get a little bit gooey sometimes. You need to give it a little bit of a shake to really get those little micro balls distributed well. And this is quite a hard effect to see until it's dry, so it's a really good idea just to put a little bit on and then to build it up in layers later. Much easier to put it on and add more than to try and remove it, although you can actually remove it with water. So I'm just looking for areas where ice might have built up. I'm thinking this SMK has been here for a few weeks now at least. At places like this I'm putting a little bit more of the wash because I imagine just more would build up there. This wash is also really good for applying snow to the tracks, so I'm literally just going to go down the whole length of the track, making sure there's some in every section. And because I didn't really weather the underside of the vehicle before, I need to make sure there's a good amount of snow in there on the suspension, on the wheels. Basically I'm looking for a really sort of frozen effect as much as anything else. Covering the tracks in it, front and back, inside and outside. So here you can see the wash once it's dried and you can start to see the effect. I probably want the snow to be deeper than that, so I'm going to apply another layer. But it is quite hard to tell, as I say, until it has dried, so slowly is the key. And then because I really wanted the underside of the vehicle to be frosted up, I got a bit carried away and really slapped the wash on under here. This works fine. The only thing you have to be careful about is just making sure you go back and get rid of any brush strokes using a little bit of water. If you stipple the wash on, it does look much more like frost than anything else. Before I added the snow to the diorama, I wanted a little bit of variation in the terrain, so I just took this material I have, it's sort of like dried ferns and twigs and so on. I got that from an art shop somewhere, and I'm just going to put these down on top of the diorama base with some PVA glue. These are not going to be seen, but I am going to layer snow over them to give it an uneven appearance, and there'll be little branches sticking out here and there just to make it a bit more realistic. Because the groundwork is quite thin, I used a bit more sculptor mould to hold the trees in place. So this is the application of the snow. This is the Chrysal Extra. I've given the entire groundwork a cover of hairspray. I've tried to avoid the vehicle because I imagine it's deepest winter and it's been snowing, but it hasn't been snowing recently because it's too cold. So there's not a lot of snow actually on the vehicle itself, but there's a lot on the ground. So I'm just using the metal sieve that was provided by Precision Snow and Ice, and I'm just putting a thin layer on top, and basically it's a case of applying a layer, turning the board upside down, knocking off the excess snow powder, putting another layer of hairspray on, and doing the same thing over and over. In the end, I think this was 5 or 6 layers of snow that I added. So sometimes with this snow product, when you turn the board over, you get these little patches where the snow breaks away in slabs. You can just apply some glue locally there and just put the extra layer on just to smooth it out. It's not a big problem. And because I forgot earlier, I'm now trying to add some broken parts of the track into the snow. It would have been much easier if I'd done these earlier and maybe even embedded them in the sculptor mold, but you live and learn. And then I applied just a localized covering of snow to try to get rid of those slab marks. And then finally the snow powder looks a bit out of place on the vehicle, so any excess that's got there by accident I'm just trying to blend in. So here are the figures ready for painting. I gave them a base coat of Tamiya XF57 buff, and then I gave them a coat of white with a little bit of buff in it, just to tone it down so their uniforms are not completely stark white. The rifle slings I made myself just from a little bit of foil super glued to the model. And then 2 colours of flesh for their faces, a base flesh colour and then a highlight flesh colour. For the reindeer, I actually did quite a lot of research on reindeer pictures, and it seems that essentially in winter you've got a sort of darker coat underneath with a light grey or white coat on top. So that's basically what I've tried to replicate here. I painted the whole reindeer a kind of chocolatey brown colour, and then airbrushed some white on from above. And what I'm going to try to do later on is to add some oils, just to try and give a bit more texture to that fur. Once I'd painted all the details on the figures, I gave them a coat of Tamiya gloss, and once that was dry I gave them a wash of artist oils mixed with enamel thinner, and that was burnt umber. I think I went a little bit over the top actually with these. Maybe the colour was a little bit strong for the white uniform. It's made it look a little bit too dirty almost. But later on I'll go over the highlights with some pure white just to try and tone that down a little bit. So I just want to make sure the wash doesn't pool too much in the crevices. And then once the oil paints had dried for about 20 minutes, half an hour, I just went over with a little bit of enamel thinner on the almost dry brush and just tried to clean up any excess. So this figure's legs are a good example of when I went a bit over the top with the wash, and now I do need to just bring it back a little bit with that almost dry brush with thinners on it. And then finally just dry brushing some white to make some highlights. Here's the reindeer. I've dampened the surface with some enamel thinners, and I'm just applying a mix of Payne's grey and titanium white. Just with a few sort of almost like streaks, like you would streak a vehicle. I'm just trying to blend those in a little bit just to give some variation to the colour tones. And here's the finished reindeer. Okay, so with the diorama base done and the tank iced up and the figures painted, it's time to put them together and complete the diorama. Before I do the final reveal, just a reminder to like or share this video if you enjoyed it, and if you haven't already you can subscribe for some upcoming videos. In the list I've got a build of a Pacific Sherman, a British Achilles, a BF-109 and a few other surprises as well. Okay, so here is the final build. Right, so thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this build. If you have, then remember to hit subscribe, and I hope to see you next time.